Welcome to the broadcast. We began, however, with Academy Award-winning actor Richard Dreyfuss. Over the past 25 years, he has been recognized as one of America's most savvy and quick-witted actors. He's also well known for his role as an activist. Now, Broadway audiences are witnessing both sides of Richard Dreyfuss in Mike Nichols' all-star production of Death and the Maiden, and we're very pleased to have him where he interrupted this evening, America. He interrupted a baseball game out at Shea Stadium. He had to leave from the fifth inning to come here to join us, and by God, we're honored. Thank you. What?
I go to one game a year.
Yeah, right. I mean, so you're not crazed about baseball?
No, it's just that Glenn Close had been asking me for 3 months to go to this game because it was a Dodger game, and I'm a Dodger fan. So I sat in the middle of the Mets section with my Dodger hat on and was reviled by the crowd.
Were you recognized when people said, Dreyfuss, go over to the other side?
Whoever you are, get the hell out of here.
But are you crazed for baseball, or
no,
just like the Dodgers? And so,
if the Dodgers get into the playoffs, I get interested.
Yeah, not likely to happen this year, you think?
I don't think so.
How about basketball? I mean, were you a big Laker fan? No, you weren't one of those guys on the front row.
No, I'm not Jack Nicholson or anything.
Or those guys. How about, what's your favorite sport?
I guess I don't have one. I watch some tennis, and I watch some golf, and I watch some baseball. But
how about politics?
Politics is a lot of fun.
Yeah. You are really out front for Governor Clinton this time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why?
Well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think that the Republicans have been in office too long, and too much of the wealth of the country has moved to the upper 1%, of which I am a member. And I make no bones about the fact that I know that the 1986 tax reform was a personal gift to me. And he has an extraordinarily empty vision of what is needed to be done, the country, President Bush. And I think we can't afford another 4 years of this. I think it's been going on too long, and I think the middle class has been crushed, and everyone has gotten confused and alienated and like that. Which is what the Ross Perot phenomenon was all about.
What did you think of the Ross Perot phenomenon?
I think that Perot never existed. As an individual, he never existed. He was our dinner table conversation. He was our fear and frustration and anxiety, which we had been talking about for 4 or 5 and 6 years.
He was a vessel for us to pour our own...
He was the magic mirror.
Yeah. Interesting. You wrote something very interesting, and I think I've got it here somewhere, which was said about you from a profile that I read about you, and... basically, it says something about your own sagacity as a political analyst, and you basically said his overriding issue, this is quoting you in a magazine article, is what he calls disconnection, America's growing alienation from the political process and their lack of concern for issues that don't directly affect them. That was several years ago that you were saying that in conversation with some profile writer. That's clearly what has happened in 1992.
Well, it's what has become... Yes, it become apparent. The great crime of the Reagan era was that he said, everything is okay, we have no problems. And he said that it was all right to create an atmosphere of secession. The rich seceded from their responsibilities. They sent their children to private schools. They didn't vote for public school bonds. Education collapses. The middle class was snookered at the beginning, and the only way that America has ever worked is that these little nations within the nation of America have always known that you got to help each other in order to help the whole. But in the 80s, it began to seem like we were in some kind of a lifeboat and hitting the ones that are in the water. You're not getting into this lifeboat. Right. And that created this disconnection, this atmosphere that I am not related to my neighbor. I'm not obligated to that group.
There is no community.
No community. Yeah. And that breeds a kind of finality to something. That if you don't correct that, this is a unique country based upon a unique idea, and it has worked for 200 years in a unique manner. If you undermine the fundamental idea of America, that this variegated groupings of small nations can work together, you ain't got no country. And that's what was happening here. And I think that the reason, to get back to the original question, is not just about Clinton and... is that Bill Clinton I believe him. See, that's the basic of it. People look at politics now, they say, I don't believe anybody. I believe Bill Clinton.
Let me interrupt. Clinton was your first choice?
My first choice.
You didn't want Cuomo, who was more of a traditional liberal and who therefore would seem to have some appeal to you because he's spoken eloquently about what you just talked about, how this country is really has to be connected
I would say this.
Of a city and in terms of a place.
Someone one day is going to write a book called The Tragedy of Mario Cuomo. For whatever reason it was, right or wrong, that this man has given up the chance to run for the presidency twice and probably has locked himself off forever from it, when he is so clearly a man who can look at the office of the presidency at eye level as almost no one else can. Had Mario Cuomo entered this race early on, my life and the life of many other people might very well have been different. However, he didn't. So that from the beginning of my introduction to Bill Clinton, I recognized him as a man who honored. See, we've gotten away from a lot of things. We approach things with an enormous amount of cynicism. And I believe in what Alan Drury wrote when he said that politics is a profession capable of honor.
Was this an advise and consent?
In the next book. It was in the next book.
Yeah.
And when I met Bill Clinton, I recognized immediately that this was a guy who fell in love with America, as I did in the 6th grade.
Right.
He fell in love with all of the simple mythologies of America, decided that governance was going to be his career, and was prepared for it.
But Ronald Reagan fell in love with America the same way, did he not? I mean, coming out of Dixon, Illinois, and in fact some say his appeal was that he remembered that, and he could articulate that in a way that had a broad. Now, you can argue about policy that later became part of what he did as governor, but that is the argument, that he fell in love with America.
Well,
right?
I think the difference is that Reagan...
I guess I hate to see anybody latch on to falling in love with America or patriotism more than any other group. I mean, one of the things that offended me about the Republican Party in the way they conducted the campaign in 1988 was that somehow one group, one party, one ideology is more patriotic than the other, or has a greater allegiance on the values of this country or the symbols of this country.
I relate to Bill Clinton because of this, what I call a love affair.
Yeah. That he has with the country that you bought.
I relate to Ronald Reagan in the same way.
Right.
The difference is that Ronald Reagan, America, was an America of mythology. It was an America that existed in portraits by Gilbert Stuart, but not in any real way in our history books, in our history.
Ross Perot's America is in part portraits by Norman Rockwell.
What Bill Clinton has done is, I mean, I never would have said this 10 years ago. I was more ideologically leftist or whatever. But Bill Clinton is a centrist, moderate man who looks upon America's problems as central, and he sees that you got to get the largest grouping of people together, and he deals with the problems of America in a much more realistic way. What Ronald Reagan did, unfortunately, was simply to deny that there were these problems. You know, Carter lost his reputation because he spoke to the United States about problems in a tone of voice that America refused to accept. Reagan never dealt with the substance of what he said except to say, oh, there he goes again.
Right.
Well, the fact is that those problems have existed, do exist, and have gotten worse, and until we deal with them, we will go deeper and deeper into this enormous hole.
Let me come back to Clinton for a second. I want to move to a lot of other things in addition to politics and on your own love of history. When Clinton made the speech that he made, what did you think of it? What did you think of it stylistically? What did you think of the length of it? What did you think of the themes of it? And did it satisfy you, as you said, a young man who came to political maturity in the 60s and who was progressive, liberal, perhaps radical? Did that speech, that middle of the road, appealing to the middle class, satisfy you, and were you enthusiastic about it?
Well, after the speech was over, first of all, this was my first convention.
Yeah.
So
Where were you?
I was all over the place.
Yeah.
I mean, I was on the floor, and I was in skyboxes, and I was in this place, and I was that place, and I was having, I cannot tell you how good a time.
Oh, I bet.
And my politics were formed very much by people like Frank Capra,
right.
So that by going to a political convention like this, I was constantly turning away into a corner and wiping tears away from my eyes. And what I thought of the speech, after the speech, some people said that it was too long. I didn't think it was too long. I was like...
Could have gone on for another half hour.
Gaga.
You was just gaga.
I thought
Keep
that...
going, Bill.
He's not the greatest speaker. Mario Cuomo is probably the greatest speaker in America. Jesse Jackson, the two of them, are the greatest speakers in America. Orators. He is not that. But he said what had to be said. And he said it well. He spoke from the center and said, we're going to take care of college, we're going to take care of this, but you've got responsibilities here. And what he said, the substance of what he said, I absolutely agree with.
Did you have any problem with some now criticizing this speech? Any problem with the notion that it was a little bit too much revealing and too involving? Some people have said it invaded the zone of privacy and that they were a little bit taken back. Richard Cohen wrote a very good column in the Washington Post.
It's funny, you know.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the press.
All right, we'll get to that. Let me go ahead.
Well, the fact is that here's a man who has been accused from the beginning of being glib and designed and processed and pasteurized, whatever, who in fact did not come from a wealthy, easy background, so that the
press never said he did.
No, the press the press gives the impression when they call him glib and designed and pasteurized that he is of that world. That so he said he thought it was important to let people know some part of his life. I thought the beginning of the speech was a little emotional, but why not? What the hell?
Tell me about the press and what you think of the political press. You watched your candidate being pummeled in New Hampshire on issues that I suspect you think had nothing to do with his ability to run the government from the White House.
You know what a flapdoodle is?
No.
In the second chapter
of flapdoodle?
In the second chapter of Gulliver's Travels, he goes to the land of the Brobdingnagians, huge creatures with flaps over their eyes and ears. And the way to get the attention of a Brobdingnagian is you must first persuade their flapdoodles, whom then will open the flap of the eyes and the ears of their masters. Okay? Well, here's the American candidate. Here's the American political civic body. And here's this flapdoodle called the media.
Right.
And what the media has done, and by the way, my objections to the media are not only addressed to the media, for which I have enormous objections. They are to television in its entirety, its physical fact, its existence in our world is being enormously underplayed in its dangers. Okay? But in terms of politics alone, the flapdoodle of the American media, it's like the needle. Everything about the candidacy, the issues, the what is important, has to be skewed through this tiny little needle. And the press steps back, and this is not a press versus Clinton objection I have. This goes way back for me.
Go ahead.
The press says we are only reporting the news. That is a lie. They are selling papers and causing profits for the networks. That's their first obligation. And when they know that a Jennifer Flowers or Give Me a Scandal, you name it, is going to create more people watching the evening news or reading the New York Post, they're going to emphasize that.
The only problem with that argument, Richard, I think, is that there's press and there's press and there's press. I mean, clearly all of us are most of us are in a commercial venture, and therefore commerce does have an impact, but it doesn't have an impact, I don't think, in terms, there's a level in terms of judgment being applied, editorial judgment being applied as to what appears on the front page. And Jennifer Flowers did not appear on the front page of the New York Times, for example, right?
The difference is this. I think there's a subtle thing that works here. If a managing news director on an evening news program has a choice between showing for the 13th time the Rodney King 30-second video or an analysis of the inner city problems, he's going to go with that video.
That's true.
And that creates an enormous danger.
Yeah.
And that is the all-pervasive problem here, especially in terms of television. Newspapers are different. Yeah. They do things such as the Times and the Post, etc.
Let me take a break. We'll be right. Richard Dreyfuss is here. We're going to talk more about politics. We'll talk about Hollywood. We'll talk about his love affair for Frank Capra movies, Spencer Tracy. Talk about the film. We'll talk about the play he's in at this very moment with Gene Hackman and Glenn Close. Back in a moment. Richard Dreyfuss. Stay with us. Richard Dreyfuss is here. Let me move beyond politics and Clinton and all that. You think he's going to win?
Yep.
You believe he's going to win? You're not worried about that?
I'm worried about everything.
When Bush and Baker get their act together and really unload that this is going to be a tough campaign, and the Electoral College may not work for you as good as the campaign seems to be going now.
I think Bush could dump Quayle and put Kemp on.
Right.
I think Bush could dump Quayle and put Phil Gramm on.
Right.
Or most specifically, Jim Baker.
Right.
I think that there's a rumor floating around that Bush won't run.
Right.
Okay. Given those melodramatic events, if it's Bush-Quayle, and everyone remembers how overenthusiastic we were in '88, and everyone works very, very hard, we're going to win this one. But we're going to win it. I think the secret weapon here is George Bush, because he is, I think, the worst president since 1866.
So your nightmare is that George Bush doesn't run.
Yeah.
And someone else who doesn't have to run on Bush's record is the Republican candidate with the Republican presidential majority as it stands now.
And they use the same kind of advertising technique to pull the wool over people's eyes again. The economic stats don't bear up, but people don't pay attention to them. People say they vote their politics. They vote their pocketbooks. People haven't voted their pocketbooks in this election, in the last 3 elections.
What do they vote? They vote their life, their passions. They vote what? They vote their fears?
They vote their fears.
Okay. You love history and biography, right?
Yeah.
Hence I gave you this book, David McCullough on Truman. And they said at 12 years old you wanted to do 2 or 3 things. You grew up in a family where politics was discussed frequently. Your father and your mother both talked about it. You loved it from day one. You wanted to go to Hollywood. You wanted to be a movie star. You wanted to make it in that world. And then you wanted also to be a United States Senator. Hence the love of history and politics flows out of that. Have you given up that dream?
Yes.
Why?
Because of 2 things. One, in order to run for office in America, too much of your time is spent begging for money.
Right.
I can't do it. 2, I find within the last 5 years that my growing activism in politics is very satisfying.
Why is it satisfying?
Because I can go into this senator's office or that senator's office and be heard. I can make a speech. I can write a speech and make it and be heard.
And you're taken seriously beyond the fact that you attract the crowd.
Well, all celebrities begin as focus pullers.
Right.
And I have to acknowledge that. Someone once said to me, apropos of something else, this guy didn't want to attend a certain meeting because he said, well, if I go into that meeting with you, you would lose your credibility. And I looked at him and I said, I establish my credibility when I open my mouth. I'm either stupid or smart, and then people know it.
Right.
I am an actor. That's why the door is open. That's because we're weird and we open doors for actors. Mm-hmm. But once I'm in the door, I either know what I'm talking about or I don't. And in the last 5 years, I've made it a point to try to know what I'm talking about.
Did you hire a political consultant, someone to come work on your staff to advise you on foreign politics? You're strong. You're Jewish.
Yes.
Yet you have great reservations about some of the policies of the State of Israel with respect to the Palestinians.
Take the yet out.
Yet what is the yet?
When he said, I'm Jewish yet.
Although
I'm Jewish
and yes. Has that caused some consternation in the American Jewish community for you?
It has. There's been criticism leveled against me for being a critic.
Right.
And that's just something that comes with the territory.
Yeah. But it is what you love to do, live, think, and talk about. Politics, foreign affairs, the questions about the country and its future.
And that's enough for me. I don't have to become the senator from California anymore.
You'd love to be, I read somewhere, chief of staff in the White House for President Clinton.
I'd actually like to be like a speechwriter.
How would you like to be CIA director?
No.
You would like to be a speechwriter?
Yeah.
Would you give it up if he said, come work in the White House?
Absolutely.
If he got elected? You'd give it up.
In a minute.
For 4 years, you'd say, Richard will be there.
In 1972, I met Wayne Morse. It's a long story, but
Senator from Oregon.
Senator from Oregon. He was running for re-election, and he died when he won the primary. And we spent enough time together for me to fall so desperately in love with him that in 1972, had he won, I was gone.
Yeah. I'll tell you a quick one more story. In 1963, I worked in the Senate. In 1964, I had just a summer job. You know how they have these subways that go back and forth from one part of the Senate office building to the Senate, And if you were working there, you could ride in them, and you could sit next to a senator. And I used to sit next to Wayne Morse because he talked about Vietnam. He's just a wonderful man with a beard, and one of the 3 or 4 listening votes to the Gulf of Tonkin, as you very well know. Let me move on. Frank Capra. What is it about Capra and his movies, and how does that connect to history, politics, and a sense of America for you?
Well, let's put it this way. There is only one flaw in the concept of Republican democracy. In theory, it's perfect. The only flaw is people. You need people, and you need an active and constantly involved citizenry. And Frank Capra was the person who made me realize that the Constitution and the Bill of Rights basically said, the power here is in your hands, and with your constancy and devotion, you can make this place work. And I believed it then, and I believe it now. And most of my political activity is based on that presumption. It was Capra who made me realize that there was an emotion involved in love of country. Not in left-wing or right-wing love of country, but in love of country, in love of the idea. We're not France, we're not Germany, we're not England, we're not anybody. We're not just an unwieldy landmass south of Canada. We are America, and America means a certain idea personified by 3 documents, the Constitution, the Declaration, and the Bill of Rights. And those 3 things have been so successful a product that we sell it to the entire world now. People are lining up all over Eastern Europe, and the tragedy of America is that now we don't know what we're selling.
And you also believe that we didn't do a very good job of recognizing the end of that communist oligarchy over there, and that when it collapsed, we didn't do a very effective job of communicating the triumph of our own values?
Well, let's put it this way. I need to use another vocabulary.
Okay.
The irony of the fall of communism was that we did not know how to celebrate this 70-year fight and victory. And realizing that, why was it that we were not able to celebrate it made me ponder this idea. And the realization for me was that we had lost faith, really lost faith in what we were selling. That we had gained a perspective, a filter through which we look at the world that we had never had in 200 years. It's said that we have this thing called the American dream. The American dream is a simple thing, and we've had it for 200 years. It is that the lives of our children will be better than ours, that they will have greater opportunity, etc., etc. For the first time in our history, including the Civil War, including the Depression, including all the other crises that we've lived through, we now do not believe that our children's lives will be better. That is the worst crime of the last 12 years.
I take issue with one thing you said. I'm not sure that that's true, American dream. I think that we just took for granted democracy rather than had lost a sense of democracy, and that it was true that in Eastern Europe certainly that value, and clearly in that thirst for freedom and for the opportunity to participate in the destiny of a country was there and had been dormant or had been imprisoned, where we had taken it for granted because we were.
I disagree with this. I think that we went through a unique series of events. From 1963 on, this is what happened to us.
Take a break. Hold on. Richard Dreyfuss is here. Let me get out of here. We'll be right back. We'll talk more about this and also, as I said, to some of the other issues that we have raised. Back in a moment. Richard Dreyfuss is here. Pick up on your point about Eastern Europe and my sense that while we may be taking democracy for granted, we had not lost our appreciation of it. There's some disagreement between you and me.
It's not about, it's a larger picture. In 1963, we lost a president, and then we were unsatisfied with its aftermath. Then we had a war, and we were unsatisfied with its aftermath. Then we had an impeachment process and the loss of a president, and we're unsatisfied with its aftermath. We went through, arguably, 20 years of unending negative events, all of which were without closure. Mm-hmm. And one evening when I was at this affair, I was sitting next to the Deputy Foreign Minister of Austria, and we were talking about what had happened to America. And she said, no country has ever gone through what you've been through. And I said, well, you've lost wars, you've won wars, you've done this and that. And she said, we had closure. You're defeated. Boom, it's over. What happened to us was that we became neurotic as a civic body. We became neurotic. Think of the American nation as a person. And what happened from 63 to the middle of the late 70s was a process that created a neurosis, an imbalance of perspective.
Assassination, war, scandal, loss of the
and all of which, not them alone, but the fact that we could not close off on any one of these things and be satisfied with them. None of these had closure, all right? That created an anxiety. And what Reagan was, and I speak as a drug addict, and I know from whence I speak, Reagan spoke as an enabler to a drug addict who said, everything is okay. It's okay, you have no problems here. We're fine. And we said, okay, we're fine. And we went on this orgy in the 80s, and now we're paying the bills.
I don't want to split hairs because we got other things we do, but here, I suspect that what the Reagan people would say is that Reagan said that we are still a great nation, and we have greatness in us, and we can do great things, and let's not think that the American century is over here. While we have seen the rise of all kinds of changes in the geopolitical structure, even before the wall came down and changes in the decline and fall of communism. But what his message seemed to be, and there was some of what you said, but also it was that we as Americans ought not lose our confidence in ourselves.
Right. He said we are a great nation.
Yeah.
He said we have no problems. Carter had spent too much time
deal
talking
with our
about
problems.
those, but he didn't. He didn't say we could deal with them. He denied having them, or else he would have dealt with them. He would have had a program to deal with them. He didn't. He had a program to deal with them, and he did, in fact, cause the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Because he built up our own army.
And he will go down in history as the president most responsible for that.
And you give him credit for that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you think George Bush is not as worthy an opponent as Ronald Reagan would have been?
I think George Bush is a vacant human. I can't imagine more proof of inactivity in a presidency than this. And even in his vaunted foreign policy, every time we've gone to war, we've held responsible for ourselves the consequences of our military actions until the Persian Gulf War, when all he did was fight the battle and then walk. And all of the consequences of the war were left to be his surprise. Oh, Saddam is still there. Oh, the Kurds. Oh, everything is, big surprise. And I think that that's an enormous failure on his part.
Okay, but before you get too, I hate to sit here being at the other side of making these other points, but before you go too far down there, George Bush did not act alone, and that he was acting in part in concert with Richard Cheney and Colin Powell and Jim Baker and Brent Scowcroft and a lot of other people. I have not seen anybody come out of the woodwork saying, we told him not to end the war. We told him not to handle the war that way. We told him to finish off Saddam, to go. And I also know a lot of people on the other side who did not want American men fighting their way to Baghdad and staying there until they had Saddam Hussein under arrest. Right?
Well, I'm not only talking about the end of that military action, I'm talking about the political consequences of the end. What were the political consequences of this war? That, like the Marshall Plan. Yeah. When we fought World War II, we held ourselves responsible for Europe.
Let me change to you personally. You are on top of your game. Death of a Maiden, and whatever you might say about it, some bad reviews, some good reviews, people, three fine actors there that you like and admire, directed by Mike Nichols. You've had hits. You seem to be at where you'd like to be in the Hollywood firmament, correct? I mean, if when they come up and say, we've got a great script here and there's a good part, you're on the list of people they might consider it, right?
I hope so.
Unless it's a Stallone or Schwarzenegger or something like that, might
well,
not
I'm
be for
working
you.
out. I'm working out. You never know.
Yeah, here, we know this publicly, too. You are, there was this wonderful recovery you made, which I have deliberately not talked about because you and I have talked about it before. And everybody knows about it. You wrapped that Mercedes 450 SL, and because you were, I assume you would, under the influence of drugs and in a bad way, you got rehabilitated, you got your career back, and you fell in love with someone. You had children. Now you're separated, divorced. Can you speak to that at all? That where your personal life and how this all impacts on you at this time when things are so positive for you?
Well, things don't seem so positive.
Yeah.
I can say this. I'm separated. I'm not yet divorced. I will be divorced at some point. And then I have children.
Love greatly.
Yeah, to whom I am completely responsible. And this is like an earthquake in my life. And I have no answers about it yet. I can only say that I always thought, when I heard people talk about divorce, that it was an event. And as I'm going through this experience, I realize it's not an event. It is the beginning of an ongoing, complete atmospheric change that I will live with for the rest of my life. There is no ending to this, because I have 3 children, and she is the mother of my 3 children, etc. I don't know a lot about who I am at the moment because of this. What I took for granted and what I held on to is now being changed. And so when the air starts to clear, then I have made a promise to myself that I will, while I stay responsible and devoted to my children, I will try to find out who again I am and what I need.
You don't know who you are because whatever happened in a relationship has caused you to question who you thought you were?
I lived a life for 35 years. A lot of that life was drugged out. Right. Then I sobered up and married, and I lived another life for 9 years. And I was attached to that life. And that life is ending and mutating in some way, and I don't know what it is. And I don't know what I want. And I don't know what I need. And I don't know who's in my life. And I don't know what I'm obligated to. I don't know.
You don't know where tomorrow will be?
Nope.
Scary?
Yep. It's been the worst. It's been a terrible year. Because not only have I been afraid for my family, my children, and my wife and myself, I've been terrified for my future. As a human. Not as a movie star or as a person, you know. It's been very, very difficult.
Is there somewhere a part of you that knows you will regain your footing because you have done it before?
Well, not necessarily because I've done it, but I know that I will regain my footing, but I make no promises as to exactly when. I mean, I have to take this a day at a time.
Yeah. Thank you for coming. It's always a pleasure to see you. I've enjoyed it as I always have. I hope you'll come back soon, and you promised to come back before the summer's over. We'll have that conversation another time. Richard Dreyfuss. When we return, journalist Frederick Kemp gives us a first-hand account of his journey through the enigmatic land of Siberia. All of that when we return. Again, my thanks to Richard Dreyfuss.